Okay, welcome back. In the previous segments of this video training on defeating disengagement, we're talking about how a disengaged employee psychologically follows a herd mentality, and the herd mentality is sociological in its influence. And what the herd mentality effectively tells your rank and file employee is that when they come to work, there's an adversarial situation between management and the workforce, and it's called the us versus them syndrome, and a lot has been written about the us versus them syndrome, so we're not going to belabor that right now. What we are going to do is we're going to start to get right to the meat of what does it take to cure disengagement. Well, we use the word cure because disengagement in its very essence is actually a psychological disease. It's a sense of mental, emotional, and even spiritual discomfort. Discomfort to the point that people don't feel that they need to put in any extra energy, emotion, and effort into their job. That pretty much describes a disengaged employee. But for the purpose of curing a disease in medicine, we first have to properly diagnose it, and part of a good diagnosis is to define it. So, what exactly is disengagement? Disengagement is when an employee doesn't feel a sense of enthusiasm or a sense of excitement when they come to work. The reason they don't feel a sense of enthusiasm primarily is because they also feel that they're not making any sort of contribution, or that the amount of effort that they put into their job is irrelevant. In other words, they don't produce value, or at least they don't produce value in their own perception. If we want to defeat disengagement, we need to create a culture whereby our employees feel that they are making a contribution and whatever it is that they do at work has value. In other words, we need to reverse their thinking. We need to reverse what we called in a previous video, dysfunctional mindsets. So, if an engaged employee has a sense of enthusiasm, has a sense of excitement, and if an engaged employee feels that they are making a contribution and that they have value, then guess what happens? That type of employee on a physical level is going to be more productive. And if you've been in management for any period of time, here's another sequelae. And it goes like this. If an employee feels more enthusiastic, they will be more productive. If an employee is more productive, the company will have better or more prosperity. And when we have more prosperity, one of the metrics is we will have more profitability. We're not talking about the metric of profit as an absolute single number. We're talking about profitability. Profitability is the ability to make profit over a period of time. It's the same thing between something being efficient and efficiency. Efficiency is how efficient you are in a specific period of time. So if we have an engaged employee will be more productive. If that employee and other employees are more productive, then the company is going to have greater prosperity. And an excellent metric for that is that its profitability, in other words, its ability to make a dollar's profit in a unit of time, is going to increase. And that is a critical economic principle, because when we look at costs, and costs decrease profitability, costs are always defined as either fixed or variable. So when expenses are fixed, and the majority of expenses to produce any product or service are fixed expenses, when expenses are fixed, if we can be more productive in a certain unit of time, then the fixed expenses stay the same, but as the productivity goes up and the expenses don't, our profitability soars. And that's what we need to look at. What can we do whereby our employees are feeling more excited or more enthusiastic when they come to work, to the point that this is physically manifested in terms of better production, leading to better prosperity, leading to better profitability as a function of time? Well, okay. Let's go back and let's look at this medically. When we look at anything medically, we say, what are the signs and symptoms? What is the patient manifesting? What seems to be the problem from what we can observe? Okay, so a disengaged employee is not enthusiastic and is certainly not excited about the idea of coming to work. Here's a good word picture, something that almost all of us can relate to, as long as you've ever belonged to Little League, or maybe had a child, or maybe a sibling who's in Little League. See, when kids are in Little League, the ones that play pitcher, back catcher, shortstop, we're talking about baseball now, are usually the most energetic kids. They're also the most agile kids, the most coordinated kids. So I've been a Little League baseball coach. When it comes to the kids that are not agile, are not coordinated, and are certainly not enthusiastic, what do you do with those kids? Well, you don't make them pitcher, and you don't put them on first base, and you don't put them as shortstop. Those are the kids that go into the outfield. Because in Little League, most kids can't hit the ball into the outfield. So here's a stereotype, but it's a good one. If you ever look at a Little League baseball team, what you will notice is that the coaches, now coaches are you, the managers, that the coaches tend to put the kids that are the least coordinated, the least athletic, and the least enthusiastic, they put them in the outfield. And if you ever watch Little League baseball, what you will notice is that the kids in the outfield, stereotypically, besides being somewhat uncoordinated, they're dreamers. They're not focused. They're usually in the outfield and they're looking around like this, or sometimes they're just sitting on the ground staring into their baseball mitt. They're not focused on the game. And they've got a reason not to be focused on the game, because the ball never comes to them. Those kids are never in play. And stereotypically, you'll notice that the kids that go in the outfield are usually overweight. So what you've got is you've got some kid, we're going to call him Ralphie. And Ralphie's one of these attention deficit disorder kids who's looking off into the sky, and he's not paying attention to the game whatsoever because he doesn't care about the game. And the reason that Ralphie doesn't care about the game is because Ralphie doesn't make a contribution to the team. And Ralphie knows that. So by definition, if Ralphie is not enthusiastic or Ralphie's not excited because Ralphie doesn't make a contribution and Ralphie doesn't feel a sense of value, then Ralphie's mind's going to be someplace else. He might physically be in the outfield, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, he's somewhere completely different. And what typically happens in these sort of situations is that Ralphie is so disengaged as to what's going on around him that when the inning is over, the coach has to yell at him, "Hey Ralphie, get your butt in here," because the inning's over and it's time for them to go to bat. And once Ralphie gets up to bat, remember, he's not especially athletic, he's certainly not that coordinated. When the pitches come to him, he either just stands there or he swings wildly. And any pitcher that's faced with a Ralphie at the bat is just going to throw 3 strikes. 1, 2, 3, and 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strikes, Ralphie's out. And Ralphie doesn't care. And then he's going to have to trot out to the outfield for the next inning, and he'll do this game after game, but he doesn't even like baseball. Which makes you wonder, why is he in it in the first place? Probably because his dad liked baseball, or maybe because his mother thinks that he needs some sort of social interaction. But putting Ralphie in a social dynamic where he doesn't feel that he's making a contribution is not in Ralphie's best interest, not for his mental, emotional, and spiritual health and welfare. Which means, if you don't get your employees to feel a sense of contribution and value, then mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, they are not going to be engaged. And as we discussed in an earlier video, if mentally, emotionally, and spiritually somebody isn't engaged in what they're doing, then physically they just show up. It's 8 to 4 and then the door. And that's the way it is, according to Gallup, for about 85% of employees. They are just there physically, and they're there physically with the belief that as long as I show up every morning at 8 o'clock, then twice a month I'm going to get a paycheck. And I'm going to get a paycheck month after month, year after year, and maybe at the end of it, get a pension. But when our employees have this almost zombie-like approach to work, and they are not mentally, emotionally, and spiritually engaged, then they will not be productive. So for somebody like Ralphie, he needs to get out of baseball. And maybe later on in life, if he's a big kid, hey, he might go into football, he might become a linebacker, and that would be a good thing for Ralphie, because Ralphie's going to excel at that. And this is where the psychology comes in. If you want to have an engaged workforce, you have to interview with engagement in mind. Let me say that again. If you want to have an engaged workforce, a workforce that is enthusiastic, that is productive, that is going to help your company have better prosperity and better profitability, then you need to interview for engagement. Well, that leads to the obvious billion-dollar question. How do you do that? Well, you have to define what it is that your company is about. You have to define what is it that your company produces that benefits mankind. In other words, what is the purpose of your company? And then you need to find people whose thinking and skills and talents align with your purpose. In other words, in the interviewing process, you must incorporate psychology, and there's a number of different ways that you can do that. The simplest way is you hire a corporate psychologist to do your interviewing for you. But you don't need to go to that length and you don't need to go to that expense, because these psychological principles are teachable. You just have to teach them to those in management who deal with HR. Because when you focus your interviewing on people that have a natural inclination to whatever it is that you do, then guess what? You're going to place somebody like Ralphie in football. In other words, it's okay to hire Ralphie. Ralphie's out in la la land in left field because he is not geared towards a sport where he has to be agile and he has to be able to run and he has to do something that is extremely athletic. And if you've ever watched the highlights in baseball on ESPN, then you can tell, I mean, professional baseball players, especially in the infield, these people are extremely athletic. But if you ever watch football, and if you watch the defensive line, or if you watch the offensive line that's protecting the quarterback, these people are also extremely athletic, but they have an extremely different physiology than somebody who plays shortstop. So part of defeating disengagement is understanding that there's a function to your company, but there's also a purpose. So remember in the previous video, we were saying that we're going to redefine management by two words that kind of sound similar, but they're certainly not synonymous. Management is about functionality, and management is also about purpose. If you haven't defined what the purpose is for your company, then you're not going to hire properly and you're going to get a bunch of Ralphies when you're running a baseball team, not a football team. Okay, so let's assume that you've learned something about psychology, that your hiring strategies have changed, and you've got some people that are naturally inclined to whatever it is the purpose of your company is. Now, once you've got those people on your team, you need to create an environment whereby they will be enthusiastic and they will be excited. So if disengagement, by definition, is people who are not excited and not enthusiastic because they don't feel a sense of contribution and they don't feel a sense of value, then if you listen to the last part of this carefully, and I recommend you might rewind it, you'll hear they don't feel. And this is part of the psychology of defeating disengagement. Because it doesn't matter how many Friday afternoon barbecues you have or what sort of Employee of the Month awards you give up, if you can't create a feeling internally in your workforce of a sense of contribution and value, then you're going to forever be plagued by disengagement.